Good evening. Good evening, and thank you for joining us today on International Workers' Day. I'm Roxana Marcoch, the David Ekman Senior Curator and Acting Chief Curator of Photography at the Museum of Modern Art. A warm welcome to those present here and those present in our conscious at this special edition of the Forums on Contemporary Photography focused on the art of solidarity, no power greater beneath the sun, which I have the pleasure of co-hosting with my colleague, Caitlin Ryan, Assistant Curator of Photography. And on behalf of us all, we extend gratitude to our guest speakers, as well as to our work fellows across MoMA, especially Megan Thengelt and Marion Tendé in the photography department, our former colleague Antoinette Roberts, as well as the audiovisual team for their alliance in organizing this event. Conceptualized in conjunction with and in advance of the survey exhibition LaToya Ruby Frazier, Monuments of Solidarity, opening at the museum next week, this session celebrates the expressions of ideation, mutual support, intergenerational agency, and community organization that persist within and endeavor to transform asymmetrical systems of power. Solidarity has been at the core of this exhibition since its inception, when in November 2022, we organized a day of dialogue centered on LaToya's social justice advocacy and creative collaboration with the working class people she has photographed and interviewed, centered on the acts of looking after and listening to one another, or as feminist theorist Tina Kampt put it in another context, centered on the labor engaged in shifting the optics of looking at to a politics of looking with, through, and alongside another. On that occasion, LaToya posed the following question: what if there were a monument to workers' thoughts? That provocation, along with the rich inquiry and discussion it inspired, served as the foundation of this exhibition, which is conceived as a series of monuments to the contribution of a multiracial working class, whether the United Steelworkers, the United Farm Workers, the United Auto Workers, or the National Association of Community Healthcare Workers, and its community stories, aspirations, grit, struggles, labor, and transcendence. Envisioned as a model of an art of solidarity, the term monument does not denote in this context mere commemoration or the static remembrance of the past, but signifies a radical expression of living collectivity generating networks of care and social change in support of human rights and free speech for a more equitable world. Solidarity, LaToya would say, is something we enact together. And in that spirit, the presentations today act in response to multiple crises: past and present, not least those enunciated in recent weeks within student campuses related to war, migration, conflict, colonialism, racialization, class divisions, and environmental urgencies. So with this, we will open now the platform for the contributions of our guest speakers, followed by conversations among ourselves and in dialogue with you all. I would like to introduce our first interlocutor, the artist, musician, and community organizer, Don Christian Jones, who we are honored to have as a colleague at MoMA this year as the inaugural 2024 Adobe Creative Resident, part of an initiative that seeks to support equity, learning, and creativity by providing resources to an artist with a demonstrated commitment to engaging communities through their practice. Don Christian has been committed to socially engaged art and shared time painting murals on Rikers Island with incarcerated youth and teaching at Harvey Milk High School, Hedrick Matrin Institute. As a rapper, songwriter, and producer, Don Christian released in 2018 the debut studio album, Where There's Smoke, which draws from their own life story and is inspired by bossa nova, jazz, and musicians ranging from Aphex Twin to Animal Collective. And in spring of 2020, Don Christian founded Public Assistance, a community design studio and mutual aid hub located in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, an enclave of interdisciplinary creators and a space for queer and trans people of color to skill share, work, and cultivate joy. Please join me in welcoming Don Christian to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Roxana. To be honest, it's been pretty hard to focus in on a keynote of this title this week while everything is happening around us, uptown, downtown, and everywhere else. But I think it still makes sense, or makes sense rather, to begin with my own fraught relationship to the words solidarity and monument, and subsequently the pairing of the two. You see, as a very Black and very queer person, I need to first engage immense historical empathy and a non-Western European worldview to experience these words as good. So much of my own work has been attempts at understanding my own body in relation to history and the unavoidable structures in commemoration to my own oppressors. We are now in a time where the statues, plaques, street names that were once revered are the subject of toppling, destruction, and renaming to my naked pleasure. No shade. Over recent years, and in working through a personal relationship to monuments and solidarity to self, I've been able to see new monumental visions of love. Ones that reveal themselves in the dark, ones that invite people in as active players, as co-conspirators, as light, as lifeblood. When I envision solidarity, I feel friendship. I think about joining, connective, holistic. To show up in real time and real space, to create together. To disrupt, intervene, invoke, incite, inspire, pause, stop, breathe, leave, sleep, wake up, come back, and do it again. I think about telling our own stories together, becoming our own archive, dancing, blues, jazz, and hip hop, achievements in seeking radical joy, free from respectability, fear, and scarcity mindsets. Making our own rules is a thing. It feels clear to me now that me and my people, my tribe, students, friends, peers, teachers, artists, organizers, service workers, union laborers, civil servants, trying our best. It is clear we are so over the marbled facades of institution and the emptiness of virtue signaling. We have trained our ears to perceive dog whistles, and so respond with clear, concise calls out to community. Reclaiming and redefining space. Affirmations and demands. Rainbows in the face of broken windows. We lead each other. We keep us safe. We share and build skills, transforming nothings into somethings, as we become the architects of our own reality. Our monuments breathe in the wind. Are colorful. They feed us. They live. They are the faces of empowered youth. Lightning in a bottle, collected into altar. A truck full of bikes in a garden. Refurbished bikes redistributed for free. Medic trainings. Community offerings. Unquantifiable ephemeral gestures of care. May these newfound monuments of solidarity continue to gift, to disseminate, and abound as wheat paste campaigns for gender affirmation, as garments designed to sustain on-the-ground efforts. May they be community fridges and gardens, crucial texts, and everything that the Black Trans Liberation Cookout embodies at the end of each summer. Today, my solidarity monuments feel most like the textures of the earth, of taking care of it and each other. They are gritty, raw, organic. They tell us what they are. I found a rock by the river, and I imbued it with all of this meaning. I pray into it my solidarity to all those in protest who call genocide by its name, who defend against the police state and mass incarceration as commercial endeavor and industry of state. I harness from my stone or rock tethered ancestries, from the Lenape Hope King to the Free Africans of Weeksville, to Octavia, to Belle, to Tony, to Francis, to LaToya and Hank, and push through to future selves. And then I let my rock go. I put it back. As in the Iwe tradition and many Afro-Indigenous cultures, communal forms are sacred to life, and so my monuments take the shape of living, breathing, loving ecosystems. Right now, outside, uptown, downtown, our youth need us. In Atlanta, in California, in Connecticut, in Gaza, our youth need us. We must trust our youth to be better than us, and we must protect them. Thank you.
Thank you, John Christian, for starting us off tonight with such a moving and incredible reflection on the complexity of this idea of the monument of solidarity, and for giving us these images of the monument as a living, breathing ecosystem, and just phrases I think will resonate with all of our speakers of the idea of becoming one's own archive or a community's own archive. So thank you. And I'm happy to introduce our second presenter at tonight's forum, Candace Hopkins, a citizen of the Carcross-Tagish First Nation and executive director of Forge Projects, whose mandate to cultivate and advance Indigenous leadership in arts and culture includes artist fellowships and public programs dedicated to decolonial and anti-colonial learning, including, among many other initiatives, collaborations towards food sovereignty with the Sky High Farm. Hopkins, who also holds the role of Fellow in Indigenous Art History and Curatorial Studies at the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard College, recently curated Indian theater, Native performance, art, and self-determination since 1969 at Bard's Hessel Museum. This and other curatorial projects call forth what she's called sedimented, or in some cases hidden histories, obscured by settler colonial narratives and made palpable in the work of Native artists. And we are delighted to have Candace with us today in the context of thinking about solidarity, land rights, sovereignty, self-determination. So please join me in welcoming Candace to the podium.
Thank you for the nice welcome. I'm going to try to recite this story from memory. And it starts in 1599. In 1599, there was an event at Accomac Pueblo used to be called the Acoma War, and now it's more rightly called the Acoma Massacre, where Juan Dionote, who was the first governor of so-called New Spain, went into the Pueblo to steal their food stores, which was enough food stores to get them through any drought that in some cases would last up to 7 years. And while they were stealing their food, and he directed his military to do this, they also raped women. They killed 500 men, 300 women and children, and the women and children that they didn't kill, they enslaved and they sent to Mexico. And then every man over the age of 24, they cut off their right foot. Monuments sometimes seem inert until they're intervened in. This is an example of one. This is Juan Dionote's left foot. And it was cut from a monument made to him that was erected in Alcalde in New Mexico, in the area that he governed in the mid to late 1500s. And in December of 1991, when the sheriff was on vacation, a person or persons, they're still not yet known, their identities are not yet known, cut off the foot of this monument. And they cut it off because these histories of Juan Dionote weren't being told, his histories of violence. Only what was being celebrated was his role as a governor and as the founding of New Spain. And in fact, it was only when one of the perpetrators who cut off this foot phoned the people at the center and said, "You might want to look at your monument," that they realized that something was missing. And then that sparked a bit of a media frenzy, all constructed by the foot thief, as they name themselves. We had some dialogue a few years ago, and I really liked that name for them. And they wrote letters to local newspapers, and they proposed different ideas of what they might do with the cut foot. They said that one idea was to melt down the bronze and make medals for the historically ignorant. Another was to gift the foot to Acoma Pueblo, if they wanted it. And the letters to both the Albuquerque Journal and the Santa Fe Reporter, they read a little bit like a conceptual art project. So there's a lot of theories as to the identity of the foot thief, and one is that they were possibly an artist. Interestingly, there are no monuments to Pope. Pope led the successful Pueblo Revolt in 1680 when the memory of the Acoma massacre was still burning in people's minds, and it is still the most successful indigenous resistance on these lands. They took back Santa Fe for more than 12 years. And interestingly, there's not a single monument of Pope in New Mexico. This one's in Washington, D.C. So these monuments, particularly in the 90s, started to perpetuate. And they started to be erected in different parts around New Mexico and also in El Paso, Texas, where there's one so large. They deliberately made it large enough so that it could be seen from the other side of the border wall. This is one that's only a 10-minute walk from our home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And in the summer of 2020, during the Black Lives Matter movement, there was a parallel Red Power movement that was erupted again in New Mexico, where indigenous activists and allies started to think again what solidarity might look like anew, what indigenous futures might look like anew. And one of the things that people started questioning again was the place of these monuments. And they were no longer innocent, including this one. This monument has a kind of funny story, and it was done by the same artist who made the monument in El Paso, Sonny Rivera. And when they started to get pushback on this monument, the mayor of Albuquerque at the time, who was really invested in it, his solution was to invite a native artist to collaborate on it. And that artist was Nora Naranjo Morse. The more Nora researched, the more she realized that this was a project she could never collaborate on. And the more she researched and the more she talked to people, she realized that this trauma of Oñate went so deep that even in her community at Santa Clara Pueblo, people weren't speaking about it. So here's the mayor, actually. He was so invested in this monument that he put himself in it. So here he is with a lamb over his shoulders. His grandchildren were also some of the first settlers represented. And this is on the grounds of the Albuquerque Museum. But in response, and I'm sorry I don't have a better image, this is Nora Naranjo Morse's work. She negotiated to get the same budget to make a different kind of monument. And this is when it was first constructed. It's a land art piece. And for those of you who might be aware of Rose Simpson's work, this is Rose's aunt. What's really remarkable about this piece, and I found it rather by accident because I was doing more research about these monuments. I was obsessed with the story about the foot. I was obsessed with finding out who took it and where it was. I followed this path, and I noticed as soon as I started on the path that the sound changed. I heard more birds. I saw more insects. I saw more lizards. And I realized that this was a very different kind of monument, and one that didn't center people. But when you reach the center place of this monument, which is called Nambe Wenge, it's just this rock. It's not a false idol. It's nothing in bronze. And it's something that quietly resists its neighbor. And for a while, I was thinking that one of the solutions to these monuments was simply to remove the riders. But then this guy returned. So I was working on an exhibition, and I saw this article in the New York Times. And consequently, I was also talking to a friend of mine, a filmmaker named Chris Eyre, who lives in Santa Fe, and he said, this guy came up to me at the bar, and he passed me a note. And on the note, he said he was the one who cut the foot. And Chris looked at him, and he thought for a minute. He was trying to gauge whether he was for real or whether he was kind of a little crazy. And then he said, well, if you took the foot, you've got to show it to me. And so they arranged with a reporter of the New York Times, who actually lives in Albuquerque, to do a bit of a drop. And so here he is. He had cut off the spur, and here's the foot thief, and there's the foot. I realized a little bit of a curatorial dream when we were able to make a cast of that foot and include it in an exhibition. We couldn't include the foot itself because our lawyers said that it was still considered felony theft over $10,000, and if we had it in the exhibition, that even if we embedded it in the concrete floor, that they could still take it out. So that happened, and then 2020 happened, and people decided that this monument could be no longer tolerated. But they weren't the only ones there resisting, because in their midst were what the Albuquerque Police Department had called for months the Friendlies, various armed militia, and there's one of them here. And they were there to defend the monument that day. And curiously, the foot also made an appearance with a member of Public Enemy who held it above his head before the next incident went down. So when people were attempting to remove the monument and they were reaching some degree of success, one of the defenders of the monument started getting aggressive with women, threw two to the ground. A friend of ours, Scott Daniel Williams, chased him out of the fray to make it safer for folks. And then Stephen Ray Baca, as he tripped and fell, turned and shot Scott 4 times point blank. My husband's in the green mask. And Scott's father was one of the first people to respond because he's a retired EMS. So his instinct is to run towards the sound of gunfire. Scott survived. He's an artist and a museum worker. He was aggressively doxxed by right-wing activists. His home was shot up. He had to go into hiding. And there was a lot of misinformation. They controlled the misinformation campaign almost from day one. They said that instead of glasses that he was holding in his hand in one of the newspaper images, that he was holding a knife. All of that was false. Stephen Ray Baca just this year got off free. The next day, city workers decided to do the final removal of the monument. But for me, what became important was the solidarities that came in its wake. So there were vigils. A lot of Native folks came and they placed themselves where Oñate had been. And I think for many of us, that was deeply meaningful and continues to be. But there were some other moves too, like this one. They decided that when that one monument went down in Albuquerque, that in Alcalde, which is a little over an hour north, that they would remove this one. And they removed this one, they said in a statement to the news, because they were worried about the monument's safekeeping. So they put it into hiding. And then actually last year, they decided to bring it back out again. And again, another person was shot defending the monument. The person who shot him did it and then sped away in a Tesla and said that he was also defending the monument and defending Hispanic history. But what we all realized in the kind of wake of this was that what had happened was, instead of an overemphasis of these monuments or an overemphasis of this violent history, the people had come together. And in fact, that was the true monument of solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Candace, for sharing that story that rooted at once in histories of violence and persistence of violence, but also moments of activism and new kinds of history making. And so next, I'm now thrilled to introduce artist and activist Willis Thomas, whose practice has for more than two decades explored the entanglements between mass media, consumer culture, and race in the United States, and modeled new modes of civic engagement and amplified the role of art in public life. In addition to seminal projects such as Unbranded, Thomas is constantly in solidarity with other artists in collaborative projects that have included Question Bridges Black Males, a video project composed of interviews of over 150 Black men living in the US, the Traveling Confessional known as Truth Booth, the Writing on the Wall, an exhibition constructed of texts, drawings, and other materials by individuals in prison globally, and founded in 2016 with Wyatt Gallery, Eric Gottsman, and Michelle Wu. Thomas founded For Freedoms, an organization that has initiated hundreds of acts of creative civic engagement, direct action, including public art installations, billboard campaigns, exhibitions, and town halls in all 50 states. And we're thrilled to welcome Hank to the podium, someone who has persistently considered what it might look like to activate democracy and democratic thinking through artistic practice.
Wow, that light is very bright. Thank you so much for that introduction. I never thought about the Truth Booth as a traveling confessional, so I'll be using that. Thank you, Candace and Don Christian, for those powerful presentations. Thank you, Roxana. Thank you to MoMA. I look forward to seeing everyone else's speeches and talks. I'm overwhelmed a little bit, though, honestly, but for a lot of things. But I said to LaToya earlier how overwhelmed with joy I am, having been able to witness her journey from a young student with a incredible sincerity and earnestness and courage, and seeing that be cultivated into such an exquisite body of work. And for the Museum of Modern Art, which I don't think could have ever even imagined a LaToya 20 years ago, to be honoring her in this way is the beginning of, I think, some form of reconciliation. But I just want to say thank you again for your grace, for your courage, for your creativity, for your spirit, for your generosity, your beauty, and your pictures. I don't really have much to say, honestly. I don't want to talk. Do you ever feel that? You ever get up in front of a microphone and I'm like, you know what? I don't really want to talk. So I'll show a few sculptures that are made with 3D scanning, so it's photography. Where's the curators? It's photography. And they should speak for themselves. So this one is unity. This one is duality. And this one is the embrace. These are people embracing. More people embracing. You get the picture. My work is really about solidarity, but it's also about the revelation that we are all one, and the hurt we cause to others, either in ignorance or in intention or in retaliation, is also the hurt we cause to ourselves, if not in that very moment, eventually. And a lot of what I have been considering is, how do I participate in this world, in this moment, without causing more harm? And I know there's something that I remember. You remember reading Rainbow? Data, what's his name? LeVar Burton, Kunta Kinte. Okay. He said something that really hit me once. I happened to be in a room with him, and he said, it's times like this where we need to stand up, be still, and pay attention. And because when we're not paying attention, that's when something sneaks up from behind us and bites us in the ass. It reminded me about this, the importance of having a heightened level of awareness and finding our connection to love when there is so much rage and anger. Because when we are angry, we are also vulnerable to a lot of manipulation. And we all are capable of being as vicious as those who we have the great disdain for. So the work of Dr. King and Coretta Scott King, who faced the ultimate level of hatred and disdain while preaching and teaching and living love and community, is something that I feel like is not celebrated enough, because it isn't really about them. They were a manifestation of all the people who loved them. And what I hope for those who get to see the embrace or have seen it, which is in Boston Common, is they stand inside of it and realize that they are standing in the center of the infinite love of the human spirit, and that we can choose love in every moment. I really don't have much to say other than that. You know, does anybody else need a hug? You know, because we have all these, the monuments to hate, the monuments to people who rape and pillage, that permeate this land. How many monuments do we have to the collective spirit that the Kings embodied? You know, I got some flack for not showing their heads, but like, what is the importance of showing someone's head when it's their heart that we remember? And I learned a lot in that experience. Anybody get to read about it in a newspaper or see it on TV? No? Oh, okay. Public Enemy had a song called Don't Believe the Hype, Chuck D. I didn't understand the power of that song until I witnessed being kind of like a victim of hype, when the reality of my lived experience was so different. And we forget that when I was like, because I liked Leslie Jones and what's that, Comedy Central, and like, I mean, I don't like Tucker Carlson, but you know, there is like, I realized, oh, these people are trying, their job is to sell ads and to distract us, and that we can be whipped up into our fervor for commercial interest, like on social media, without even realizing it anymore. So I just challenge you. I got off of social media. We'll see how long I do it. It's been 2 months. LaToya, you've never really been on social media. Can you believe this? People are like, I need it for work. I remember like 20, you never been on social media. And like, look at what she's been able to accomplish, not swiping through somebody else's life. That's that.
Thank you, Hank, and thank you for these beautiful public sculptures. I was recently in Boston, where I'm from, and it's a city with a fraught historical relationship to the civil rights movement, especially in the 70s, and I think it was incredible to see exactly what you were talking about, people standing inside, kind of moving around and paying attention. And so I think it's out there doing the work. Let me just skip forward and up. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our next speaker, Marcelo Guerrero, the DiMartini Family Curator at the Whitney Museum of American Art and scholar of modern and contemporary Latinx art. Part of the curatorial team that organized Vida Americana, Mexican Muralists Remake American Art. In 2020, Guerrero also organized in 2022 the presentation of Martin Gutierrez's Billboard Supremacy and the watershed exhibition No Existe un Mundo Post Huracán, Puerto Rican Art in the Wake of Hurricane Maria, a survey of responses by artists in Puerto Rico and the diaspora to the transformative years in the wake of the Category 4 hurricane, highlighting the intertwined histories of ecological destruction, environmental catastrophe, tourism, state-sanctioned neglect, pre- and post-hurricane, and the collective acts of grief and community solidarity that emerged. And I'm excited to welcome you to the podium to speak a little bit more about this exciting exhibition.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Roxana, for the invitation, and Caitlin and the photography department and MoMA. And it's an honor, LaToya, to be here with this esteemed panel of speakers. Okay. When the idea for the exhibition, No Existe un Mundo Post Huracán, Puerto Rican Art in the Wake of Hurricane Maria, first entered my mind, I was very much reacting to the harm done in the media of reducing the pain and suffering, but also the resilience, fellowship, and even joy to the image of a president throwing paper towels to a people who 2 weeks earlier had survived one of the strongest hurricanes in Puerto Rico's history. If that didn't paint enough of a picture, then take any of the photographs published in the aftermath of September 20, 2017 that reproduce the same tired visual tropes. That is, a barren land razed to the ground by the winds, flooding or destruction are also plausible backdrops, with a lonesome figure walking in the distance, unaware of being photographed. Those images did not bear witness to the lived reality that followed that fateful day. The poetry, visual and written, of a group of artists working in the aftermath of the event would create a visual discourse of resistance, reflection, criticality, frustration, empathy, and love. Opening in November 2022, the year of the 5th anniversary of Hurricane Maria, No Existe un Mundo Post Huracán was intended as a space of catharsis. In the absence of a truth commission that would begin to address the ills, injustices, and neglect suffered in the last 126 years of American colonization, I believe exhibitions provide an outlet to express and feel a range of sentiments, empathy, and I guess solidarity to a certain extent, being paramount. It was important, therefore, to begin the exhibition with 2 works that centered on the perspectives of the people who lived through the hurricane, thus inciting visitors to ask, what am I a witness of? What position do I occupy in relation to these stories? Upon the elevator doors opening onto the 6th floor, visitors were welcomed by Sofia Cordoba's projected film titled Dawn Chorus 2, El Niágara en Bicicleta. The hour-and-a-half film starts with cell phone footage taken by the artist's aunt as she narrates the first hours of the hurricane after the power has gone out. Interlacing raw, first-person accounts recorded by Cordoba's family members and friends are lyrical vignettes accompanied by old salsa songs culled from her late grandfather's music collection. Documentation and speculation meet in Dawn Chorus 2 as a way of retelling past events while making space for moments of beauty that signal an uncertain future. Cordoba's video combines ineffable moments with unvarnished chronicles of destruction, One doesn't supersede the other. Both are needed to understand life after the storm. Next to Cordova's film, and almost like a three-dimensional installation of one of the homes featured in Don Chorus 2, was Edra Soto's Graft, an ongoing project since 2013. Graft, the series, pays tribute to the peripatetic history of vernacular design in Puerto Rican and diasporic architecture through the motif of the rejas, wrought iron fences, and the quiebrasoles, concrete fences. Aspects of this history are usually turned into essays that Soto commissions from historians and curators to accompany her installations, sometimes making them accessible as a printout or as a PDF downloadable from her website. Notwithstanding their aesthetically pleasing attributes, these fences are normally used as a security measure, creating a barrier that demarcates the separation between public and private. In recent iterations, including the one in No Existe at the Whitney, Soto embeds slide viewers through which the audience can witness photographs taken by her and other collaborators of the landscape in the aftermath of hurricanes Irma and Maria. Irma was a hurricane that hit Puerto Rico 2 weeks before Maria. In a clever play of perspective, peering through the fence doesn't yield photographs of quaint domesticity. Looking in through the fence is actually a way of looking out, making the outside viewer a guest in Soto's home. Home being, in this case, not a living room, but a man fixing a power line, a protest on the streets, a call to action, the hand of the artist's mother. This invitation to witness the artist's lived experience is further stressed by the mirror surrounding the peepholes of the slide viewers. In this unspoken contract, you must implicate yourself. You can't see the image before first seeing your reflection. Empathy rather than passive spectatorship is a key to unlocking the meaning of graft. In both Graft and Don Chorus 2, witnessing implies questioning your relationship to Puerto Rico, and more specifically to the multitude of images, personal and public, private and shared, that weave a complex tapestry of emotions in the wake of a natural disaster, but also a man-made one. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel, and for sharing with us this incredible work and this idea of witnessing, implying, questioning both your relationship to Puerto Rico, to public space, to private space, to the sort of permeable borders between them. And now I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Naeem Mohaiemen, artist, scholar, and associate professor of visual arts at Columbia University. Through photography, film, archives, and essays, Mohaiemen researches failed leftist utopias, largely in the Muslim world, and the interdependence of individuals and collectivities, from families to communities to nation states, during moments of social change, crisis, and uprising. And many of his explorations emerge from key points in post-colonial history of South Asia, namely the partition of Bengal in 1947 and the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War. With Esther Sakach, Mohaiemen is author of the recent anthology, Solidarity Must Be Defended, an urgent and timely inquiry into the difficulties and possibilities that underpinned transnational solidarity during the Cold War, from misrecognition and false alliances to the entrenchment of mechanisms of state power, a project that resonates profoundly today. So please join me in welcoming Naeem to the podium.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, everyone. As the slide tells you, I teach at Columbia University. So as you can imagine, it's difficult to speak without speaking about the events of last night, and I will speak about them. And thank you, Don Christian Jones, for also highlighting that it's uptown, downtown, all across this country, actually. So I will actually use this opportunity to talk about the limits of solidarity, what we're allowed to express solidarity for and what we're not. What Mark Lamont Hill and Mitch and Petnick have said in their new book, Except for Palestine, The Limits of Progressive Politics. And also what happens when a university and an institution monumentalizes a particular past, but then brutalizes the present. So before the events of last night, when the NYPD invaded the Columbia and CUNY campuses, as well as new invasions today, in synchronization with police actions at multiple campuses that currently host Gaza encampments, I had planned to talk about this book that Esther Zakax and I recently edited. With a title that references Michel Foucault's series of lectures at the Collège de France, for Foucault's society, we had swapped in solidarity, that celebrated and challenging form of action. I was planning to talk about book's example of transnational solidarity, actions by artists in the Cold War era, about Marilyn Nance's photographs from Festac 1977 in Nigeria, and Dominique Malakwai's archival collection from 4 Pan-African festivals. Hamaya Hiroshi's images of Japan on fire against the US-Japan Security Treaty, Cecilia Vicunia's work in London building up new solidarity alliances after the CIA-sponsored murder of Salvador Allende, and Stefan Labudovich's work as a cameraman documenting the Algerian war against French occupation. But all those stories and photographs have turned into ash in my mouth today. Standing on this stage, I wonder about the meaning of all our collective works and the communities we think we build when we have seen all of it implode in the months since last October. When we have seen how fragile are our calls to solidarity, our monumentalization of Generation 68, and how sharply delineated are the borders of who is judged worthy of solidarity, sympathy, and assistance, and who is rendered beyond the pale, the Palestinians described as human animals. The events of the last month have brought many things we claim into question, where young students are doxxed, harassed, arrested, brutalized, suspended, and face the destruction of their lives, all because they were marching to stop a faraway war. Some of you may disagree with their slogans, their ideology, or even perhaps their tactics. But how do we now continue to live knowing that a generation of students are being taught a hard lesson on the limits of free speech? I've been thinking about Mark Rudd, one of the leaders of SDS, who was expelled from Columbia University for leading the takeover of Hamilton Hall exactly 55 years before the takeover 2 nights ago. Mark eventually found a life teaching high school. He is occasionally sought out by documentary filmmakers for his opinion. Is this the second life our students will have? 50 years from now, a documentary filmmaker from Brooklyn will finally make a story about their life. Lives shattered by their elders who could not tolerate their exercise of free speech and push things towards a cataclysmic confrontation. This is the only image in this presentation taken by myself. This is from 2 days ago. The orange vests are Columbia University faculty protecting the encampment. One of the first actions of the university administration was, of course, to shut down the university and remove all faculty from campus so we could neither prevent any actions nor be witnesses. My social media feed tells me that Wesleyan University President Michael S. Roth has become one of the rare university leaders to call for a ceasefire. He has said in a speech, "Silence at a time of humanitarian catastrophe isn't neutrality. It's either cowardice or collaboration. We don't need institutions speak, but we do need leaders of academic and cultural institutions to call on our government and our fellow citizens to address this crisis. There are times of such egregious moral calamity that silence, as Elie Wiesel pointed out long ago, is complicity." Since last night, I have been thinking of the photographs that circulate in our collective memory and what kinds of work they do. Of late, I have been thinking that the veneration of the 68 generation on my campus has turned into a cul-de-sac. These images serve to convince us that we're heirs to a revolutionary tradition of protests and that we live in continuously improving times. J. Caspian Kang recently wrote, "There is something undignified about breathlessly scolding young people, particularly when they're seemingly being silenced, as in the case of Asna Tabassum, a Muslim American student at the University of Southern California, whose valedictory address was canceled on account of vaguely described concerns for safety, or when they're being mass arrested, as they were this week at Columbia." I'm convinced that one of the reasons these stories get so much attention from those of us in the media is that they require less courage than addressing the actual war. The incalculable loss of life, the horrific images of October 7th, and the recurring reel of carnage out of Gaza. So we funnel our despair and insecurity about those events and our responsibility for them through relentless attention to campus culture. Perhaps we've been spending so much time with images of the past because we cannot find the imagination or the mechanism to change a devastated present. I invite all of us to think about whether photographs of the past have actually become our handicap, removing us from the necessity of changing our present. Thank you.
Thank you, Naeem, and especially in moments like this, as a photo historian, I take to heart exactly what you're saying about the iconicity or the valorization of images and the way that they obscure certain political urgencies, and I think that it's something we all ought to think about. And someone who I think does think about this is our next speaker for this evening, photography historian Margaret Innis, assistant professor in the Department of Art and Music Histories at Syracuse University. And her research examines photography's role in public life and its historic mobilization as a socialist form. And her current book project, Collective Forms, Photography in the Era of American Communism, explores the important function that mass print media played in the American labor movement of the interwar period. An expert on the American manifestation of the international worker photography movement, I would like to invite Maggie to the podium to talk a little bit with us today about the Workers Film and Photography League.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Roxana. Thank you, LaToya. And thank you, Naeem, for that. I'm so happy that we are all here together. So I'm going to show you some more pictures or photographs from the past. Another image that lives in our collective memory, a different kind of image. When we consider the history of social documentary photography, many of us might think of the 1930s as the high water mark for this kind of work, which typically takes up issues of aesthetics and politics, the social and the real, to generalize just a little bit here. And in the United States, the 1930s were years when documentary helped redefine the terms of labor's visibility, often through images that made an implicit case for state welfare and liberal reform. In Dorothea Lange's well-known White Angel breadline, for instance, the subject's downcast eyes and clasped hands are gestures of supplication as much as fatigue, and his pivot away from the crowd is also a turn toward the viewer that solicits compassion in lieu of alms. This image affects us, but it also speaks to a documentary practice articulated from above, a register in which every worker appears as one of the deserving poor and every viewer as a white angel. So in the spirit of May 1st and LaToya's exhibition and the protests that are happening uptown and downtown and across the country, including at my university in Syracuse, what I'd like to share with you today are images of an American documentary from below, made in the same interwar moment, but from a perspective grounded in working class militancy and solidarity. The group portrait you see at right was taken by the Workers' Film and Photo League of Chicago at something called the Farmers' Second National Conference, which was held in the city in November 1933. And this conference drew farmers and sharecroppers from across the US to organize and plan strikes against New Deal reforms that had in fact only exacerbated their economic precarity. Here, members of the Workers' International Relief paused from their work feeding conference delegates to strike a pose for the camera. The difference between this communal kitchen and Lang's breadline is stark. The lighting is artificial and harsh, and in its bluntly descriptive detail, it shows us politicized workers who engage each other as comrades rather than atomized welfare recipients. This is a vision of solidarity, not charity, as their sashes read. And much like their shared disposition before the camera, it's a vision that displaces whiteness as a moral and civic ideal. Between 1930 and 1934, workers' film and photo leagues were formed not just in Chicago, but in New York and other cities across the US. And these groups were supported by the Communist International and the American Communist Party. And so in this respect, the images that these photographers made reflected the party's organizational program. At this time, that program demanded solidarity for Black self-determination and the total eradication of white chauvinism across party ranks. On the other hand, these photographs weren't simply illustrative of this politics of solidarity. They were also constitutive elements of solidarity building, in which the act of envisioning a shared political program was the first step toward a shared politics. In worker photography, this solidarity building often takes the form of an insistently partisan visual rhetoric that privileges workers and their demands. In these press prints from the print morgue of the Daily Worker, for instance, the emphasis on self-fashioning, on tightly framed slogans, and the general slippage between candid street shots and honorific portraits all mark a departure from photojournalistic convention, which had a greater investment in climactic scenes of aggression and violence. Another important dimension of this work is its affective frequency, which moves us away from a libidinal economy of violence toward libidinal desires for connection and collectivity, or toward love instead of hate. Individual bodies lose their distinct contours and become multitudes without beginning or end. But the crucial piece, without which these things wouldn't work, is that these images circumvented a media ecosystem otherwise dominated by just 4 corporate picture services and glutted with pictures of labor that mirrored the violent perspective of strikebreakers and the police. By contrast, as we see in this candid group portrait of 3 furriers assaulted while picketing, worker photography spoke to this state-sanctioned abuse. These photographs were distributed through their own clearinghouses and the channels of the communist press, finding their way to viewers to amplify shared grievances and demands that capitalist media habitually trivialized, compartmentalized, and suppressed. This is then another history of documentary photography, and one that raises some pointed, if not unfamiliar, questions about the ideological work that documentary is often made to perform. And like LaToya's collaborative practice, I think it prompts us to consider genealogies of documentary that don't do the work of neoliberal hegemony on its behalf and invite us instead to envision what a shared politics looks like. Thanks.
Thank you, Maggie, and for sharing with us about this episode in photo history and an attempt to create a visual rhetoric and forms outside of capitalist image economies. And I hope that during the Q&A we can talk a little bit more about this genealogy and its legacies today. And with our next speaker, Ashley James, associate curator of contemporary art at the Guggenheim, where she organized the recent exhibition, Going Dark, the Contemporary Figure at the Edge of Visibility, a groundbreaking synthesis of the tactics of concealment and obfuscation used by Black artists since the 1980s to question the terms and limits of representation. And James's 2021 exhibition, Off the Record, centered notions of visibility and concealment in other ways, that is, on artistic meditations, on records, government files, newspaper offices, and archives to question the construction of history. And in her former role at the Brooklyn Museum, James also organized Soul of the Nation, Art in the Age of Black Power, Eric N. Mack, Let Me Walk Across the Room, and co-curated John Edmonds' A Sidelong Glance. And I am pleased to welcome Ashley to the podium and back to MoMA, where I know that she served as a fellow in Drawings and Prints from 2016 to 2017. So we're thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here in your company on this May Day, an auspicious holiday that most certainly reflects the spirit of solidarity that serves as the object of today's inquiries in our own communion. And thank you for my predecessors who evoked the ongoing crisis at my alma mater, in particular Columbia. I was up late watching all of the updates and in solidarity with the students there who are protesting the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Thank you to LaToya, Roxana, Caitlin, everyone else who made this evening happen, Megan for her coordination, and others. I'm gonna skip this and come back. So as mentioned, I'm Ashley James. I am a curator at the Guggenheim. When I was invited to speak today, it was in the context of an exhibition that I just curated, as mentioned, titled Going Dark, which closed just a month ago. And so with 5 minutes to speak today, I thought I could focus on the work of just one of the 28 artists who were featured in the show, Charles White, who lived between 1918 and 1979. Going Dark brought together artists who present, it's not just Black artists actually, but primarily Black artists who present the figure, but then obscured it some way, which is why I called it Going Dark, which means to hide or otherwise conceal. And what I argued in the show was that deriving from different vantage points with kind of different articulations, these artists obscured the figure as a means of reflecting on questions of visibility as it related to socio-political understandings of it. So what does it mean to be seen in the world, and as in a marginalized subject specifically? Hank was in the show. Thank you, Hank. As mentioned, it featured work by 28 artists working across media, painting, sculpture, drawing, photography, video, and more. And importantly, it was intergenerational, ranging from the recently departed Faith Ringgold to some of the youngest artists in their 30s. Charles White was one of these artists representing the earliest generation, and I included 3 works from his oeuvre: Nobody Knows My Name, J'accuse, and a third, untitled work. So I've loved Charles White for quite a long time, especially after seeing his work, I think for the first time in person, in Kelly Jones's Now Dig This, which was in MoMA PS1 in 2012. And this fondness grew in the context of the retrospective that was here and that I had the opportunity to work on as a fellow, as mentioned, curated by Esther Adler in 2017. So I thought of White for this event because he is, by certain definitions, a quintessentially political artist. His work is defined by these kind of beautifully rendered images of Black people depicted in a posture of potential strength, love, sometimes called, quote, images of dignity, and in short, positively. So working throughout the 50s and 60s and 70s, this was an important contribution to be held up in contrast to visions of Black persons rooted in degradation, subjugation, subservience, or altogether absent. And in the context of photography, there's a kind of interesting dialectic that is at work with his work and the photographic, being that photographic images largely constitute the archive, against which White was making his drawings. And at the same time, as a retrospective helpfully pointed out through archival research, the photograph often served as a source material that White would later expand upon. And indeed, it's not only through his commitment to producing these images of dignity that White can be thought of as an activist artist, but through his deliberate engagement with the classical political arena as such. So his work was reproduced in political publications like the Communist Daily Worker. He made a fundraising portfolio for Masses and Mainstream, another mid-century communist publication. He also lent work for reproduction for specific political campaigns, i.e. What we see here, which is the reproduction of his drawing Love Letter, a lithograph, which was reproduced for the purpose of fundraising for Angela Davis by the National United Committee to free Angela Davis and all political prisoners. So these postcards were sent to politicians demanding the release of her and other political prisoners. So this political engagement is absolutely clearly there, and a clear case in my mind of solidarity in one sense. But I wonder here how it can complicate the political and in turn a concept of solidarity by looking a little bit differently at what is at work in White's practice. One of the most important things that I remember speaking to Esther about when I was here in the making of the retrospective was that she really wanted to press upon what it meant to be a political artist as segregated from the modern artist, and how important it was to see Charles White within a modernist tradition, even if his work is considered conservative or traditional in one sense. And indeed, the very gesture of holding the retro here was important to that aim. And that kind of expansive thinking was what influenced my inclusion of his work in Going Dark, because I wanted to prove that even as he was a political artist, he's also a conceptual one. In Nobody Knows My Name, you see this image of a young boy, a face coming into the light, a darkness and the blankness becoming metaphors for the refusal of an Enlightenment, democratic value, of equity and liberty and recognition for all. It's metaphorical. In this conclusion, as the retro did, I wanted to argue and affirm the fact that even as he was making a kind of political gesture in his figuration, it was always through the lens of a kind of conceptual thrust, even if it was a romantic one. And in so doing, it kind of reoriented my understanding of where the political, conceptual, and thus where solidarity can be understood in relation. So thinking forward with the conceptual political, I'm interested in what it would look like to locate other forms of solidarity, other forms of a solidarity formulation that comes from a kind of political conceptual dialectic. And that leads me to the very concept of time or process. What might we make of time in the work of Charles White? When I think about a work like Nobody Knows My Name, I think about what it means to devote time to the endeavor of drawing, of making, to sit down to the blank page, to the canvas, to start with the first mark, and the next, to shade, to smudge, to draft across hours, days, months, years, the time spent to render. And that makes me think what it might mean to see solidarity, not only for what it means in the context of the kind of lent portrait for the purposes of reproduction for the postcard, but in the very act of making. It is to determine, after all, that something, someone, a people, are important enough to matter so that one's time might be devoted to this act. It is a gesture of a recognized humanity through the hand. Often when I think about the concept of time, I am retuned to a line in a poem by the poet Nick Laird. The poem's called The Last Saturday in Ulster. And he's narrating a visit home in Ireland with his partner, who just so happens to be the writer Sadie Smith. And the third stanza reads, "An orange March in Antrim will see me late arriving and standing out at Aldergrove. An English girl might well believe that time is how you spend your love." I've always remembered that quote, "Time is how you spend your love," because I think it speaks to something very true. So going back to Love Letter, in this image, a Black woman confidently looks forward, her voluminous afro framing her expertly rendered face. She is a figure centrally placed within this kind of swirl of possibility. Below her shoulders, a pink rose placed in relation, a symbol of beauty, of promise. What one cannot see, of course, is the time spent making this come to be. All we have is the evidence that is the thousands of marks that ultimately constitute a person, the unseen hours blooming into the rose. So what would it mean then to see a kind of, to draft, to draw, to make, to sketch, to render as a political act, as an act of solidarity, as time devoted, as an act of love? Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley, for finding the political not only in these instances of kind of clear reproduction in political spaces, but in the act of making and in the possibilities of time as an act of solidarity. And our final presenter tonight needs little introduction, but we'll do it anyway. And it is my distinct honor to introduce artist and activist LaToya Ruby Frazier, whose upcoming survey exhibition at MoMA, Monuments of Solidarity, is the culmination of more than 2 decades of work made about and with working class communities facing healthcare and ecological crises, discrimination, fighting against the erosion of labor rights. As many of you know, Frazier is the author of books including The Notion of Family, Flint is Family in 3 Acts, and The Last Cruise. And among numerous exhibitions and accolades, her recent installation, More Than Conquerors, a monument for community healthcare workers of Baltimore, Maryland, was awarded the Carnegie Prize at the 58th Carnegie International, and I could go on with awards and honors. But I think that the best thing to do would be to let LaToya give her own words and welcome you to the podium.
Good evening. Thank you all so much for your energy and your time being here. I know you could be anywhere. This was probably one of the first nicest days. So it means a lot that you came here on the eve of this exhibition that we've been working on for almost a month now, perfecting every single detail, giving so much love and care to being able to bring what I think would be culturally a groundbreaking show to this institution. I want to give thanks to all of the scholars and artists and activists that are here presenting. It feels like a nice embrace before I have to stand up and take responsibility for what is about to open to the general public with the media. So I appreciate all of you kind of blessing me and gracing me with your intellect and your words and your thought and your care. And I just want you all to remember to give thanks to yourself, because it's not simply about how you serve here when you show up into institutional spaces like this. It's also about how you're living at home with your families, with your communities, with your loved ones. All the little decisions we have to make every day when we decide, do we want to go outside our front door today? Do we want to put our energy into advocating and fighting for what's right? Or do we just want to have self-care and recovery and take care of ourselves? I think Hank puts it really beautifully, as well as Ashley and Margaret, talking about love. Is certainly something that's been on my mind lately, because I feel like we sacrifice the love for ourselves when we're trying to stand up and fight for what's right. But in order to get that to continue to happen and have longevity, you actually do have to take care of yourself. So I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you for being here and for uplifting me in this moment before Roxana, Caitlin, and I have to withstand the barrage of questioning when we open this exhibition here at this institution. So I'm going to introduce the show since you'll have the first time to hear it from me before you hear sound bites from the media. So in the spirit of International Workers' Day, I'd like to introduce some of the meanings and concepts behind my survey exhibition, Monuments of Solidarity. It is my dream and vision for a museum of workers' thoughts. It's about mutual aid, care, empathy, and compassion that adds value to people's lives from the bottom up. Monuments of Solidarity is a rare exhibit where the people depicted speak back to the audience. It's for everyday Americans to feel seen and heard. In Monuments of Solidarity, I use my photographs for art, social justice, and equity. In my artwork that you see here, Campaign for Braddock Hospital, Save Our Community Hospital, which was on view in the Whitney Biennial in 2012. The result of that work being on view that people don't know about, and I'm gonna raise this, I'm gonna emphasize this a lot because scholars, curators, the media keep avoiding this part of my practice, so I'm gonna make it very clear to you today. In my artwork, Campaign for Braddock Hospital, Save Our Community Hospital, I gave the proceeds of this artwork to doctors at the Muslim Council of America for medical supplies and extended hours at the Braddock Free Health Clinic located in Braddock's municipal building due to the fact our community hospital was being torn down. And so that happened in 2010 and 11. And it was Tony Buba, my hometown hero and filmmaker, who took me after participating in the adult program at the Whitney Biennial, where we talked about the gentrification there with Sharon Zukin, that escorted me back to Braddock so that I could give the check after the Whitney Museum acquired these prints, so I could give the check to those doctors. Monuments of Solidarity is about community organizing through the process of making photographs. It's about family and community becoming the answer to solutions that protect their human rights. In Monuments of Solidarity, it's about the power of photography, how to unpack the power of photography as a platform for art, social justice, and cultural change. In this artwork, Flynn Family in 3 Acts, I gave the proceeds of this artwork to Amber Hassan and Shay Cobb and the Sister Tour, an artist collective in Flint, Michigan, in order to bring a 26,000-pound atmospheric water generator to their city so that their families and community could control and have access to their own free, clean drinking water. On this day, especially if this is being recorded, mark my words, on this day, I declare that the state of Michigan should bestow a proclamation to Amber Hassan and Shay Cobb for creatively solving the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. In Monuments of Solidarity, the people depicted in the artwork through portraits and first-person testimonies are the prophets and apostles of our time. The Last Cruise is a 21st century workers' monument, half holy, half assembly line, made of metal as a sculptural, architectural, photographic installation, and in and of itself is a movement in contemporary photography. In my art practice, I've always shared my platform and access to elite spaces with women artists who are not seen as artists or part of this art world. For The Last Cruise, I ensured that union photographer Casey King's photographs, like this one that you see here, of her union brothers and sisters, would be published and circulated through mass media platforms like the New York Times, Hulu, and now the Museum of Modern Art in perpetuity. As a monument and memorial, whenever the last cruise is on view, it holds UAW Locals 1112 and 1714 together. In this artwork, they are permanently held, united, surrounded by faith, hope, and love. Monuments of Solidarity moves people from individualism to collective unity. In fact, the very fact that the Museum of Modern Art chose to acquire this entire installation, knowing that its workers organized and joined the UAW while I was creating this piece, and currently leading tours with not only its UAW staff, but also other unions in New York City, is a prime example of how an artwork can bring about cultural change and how artists and institutions can work together to uplift and value people in this nation. In this regard, my role as an artist is to stand in the gap between creative class and working class sectors. Sometimes, all you need is one person to listen and believe in you. I can never thank Roxana Marcoch enough for her camaraderie, allyship, vision, courage, and leadership for this exhibition. In my monument dedicated to Sandra Gold Ford, I lift up her voice in order for you to learn about her cosmic vision and exalt her on high as the photographer, writer, artist, teacher, mentor, mother, and still worker who preserved the labor, life, and existence of her coworkers at Jones and Laughlin Steel in Pittsburgh, PA. Mark my words, and you can quote me on this. The cultural institutions in Pittsburgh have failed to recognize and honor Sandra Gold Ford as they should. And I say in this exhibition, no more. In Monuments of Solidarity, Sandra Gold Ford is anointed as the national treasure she has always been. When a Black woman steelworker lovingly circumvents one of the largest pension heists in America through her own photographs, creative writings, archives, preservation, and perseverance, we should salute her for her service, creative devotion, and enlightenment. Museums across this nation should move actively to collect her photographs, writings, her illustrated wisdoms, and archives. Evelyn Nicholson was a community health worker, CHW for short, for the University of Maryland and the Institute of Human Virology. She lived a life of service, advocating and supporting people with HIV and AIDS. During COVID-19, she interceded for the welfare and care of her clients and patients and made certain that doctors in the medical care system treated them with dignity and respect. Her activism and existence thwarted racial disparities in health. Monuments of Solidarity brings Americans from different socioeconomic backgrounds together. This is a picture I took of Evelyn Nicholson talking with collector Mitch Rails during the opening of More Than Conquerors, a monument for community health workers of Baltimore, Maryland, 2021 through 2022, at Gladstone Gallery in March of 2023. I documented this moment of Evelyn and Mitch without knowing that this would be the last time I saw her and would experience her presence on earth. Evelyn passed away 2 months later, and I cherish this photograph because it is evidence and proof that when galleries, collectors, artists, and museums choose to be on the right side of history, when they choose to move out of their comfort zone, beyond the status quo, beyond the demands of capitalistic society, powerful cultural change and justice can happen. Barbara Gladstone and Emily Rales, through Gladstone Gallery and Glenstone Museum, ensured that More Than Conquerors would be gifted to the Baltimore Museum of Art in order that this 21st century workers' monument be permanently fixed to the CHWs like Evelyn Nicholson could be honored and recognized where they work and reside. The monument will be unveiled to celebrate CHWs and their families and communities in November of this year. What's monumental is not a singular image of man, but rather it is the form of love enacted upon us in times of great sorrow by those who we choose not to perceive. Monuments of Solidarity is a history lesson in civil rights, workers' rights, and civic engagement. And I quote the great figure here before us. We are citizens and we are residents of the state of California, and we want the rules set up to protect us in this state right here. If the rules to settle our economic problems are not forthcoming, we will call a general strike to paralyze the state's agricultural economy. We will call a general strike to let the legislators and the employers know that we mean business. We will take economic pressure, strikes, boycotts to force recognition and obtain collective bargaining. That's none other than Dolores Huerta. That's an excerpt from the National Farm Workers Association March and Rally in Sacramento on April 10th, 1966. As we brace ourselves for one of the most tumultuous, divisive election cycles, remember that labor rights and civil rights activist Dolores Huerta led one of the most effective, racially diverse social justice movement in this nation's history. In the final room of this exhibition, Dolores took me inside the community hall and labor in the library at the Arvin Migratory Labor Camp to show, teach, and guide me on how to walk in the footsteps of Woody Guthrie, John Steinbeck, and Fred Ross Sr. And in particular, Fred Ross Sr., shown here in this photograph, a master organizer who led Dolores to dedicating her life's work to grassroots organizing. It is in the spirit of their relationship, a multiracial and intergenerational set of relationships, this final room is choreographed and is a call to action and forward march into the future. My monument, a pilgrimage to Dolores Huerta, the 40 acres, Arvin Migratory Labor Camp, Nostra Senora Reina de la Paz, Dolores Huerta Peace and Justice Cultural Center, made in 2023 and 2024, is dedicated to Dolores Huerta, her children, her grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. It is important that we recognize that Dolores Huerta is a beloved mother and grandmother, and that her family has made the sacrifice to share her with the world and to carry her legacy forward. I'd like to close with the words of Dolores' son, Ricardo Chavez. I've always been conflicted about my mother. She can be the queen of awkward. But reflecting on those moments, I realized that I felt out of place because I was experiencing something new, challenging, and often transformational. I am an entrepreneur, but I am also just a revolutionary person. I'm always pursuing new, innovative, disruptive, and transformative ideas and projects. My greatest inspiration and influence from my mother has been the understanding that when you're doing something of a higher calling, all things else are minuscule. No state agency or multinational corporation even registers when compared to the immensity of the universe and your universal calling. Thank you. And I believe all the panelists are going to come up now, so we're going to transition so that we can have a conversation.
So thank you so much, everyone, for the amazing presentations. And I cannot even begin to say how deeply honored and how absolutely, what a trip it's been for the past 2 years working with LaToya. I mean, it's incomparable to have learned from her deeply poetic, fiercely political work. And Caitlin and I just had a blast, and the exhibition is almost up, and I can't wait for you all to see it. So you have heard various manifestations, in these individual presentations of what solidarity may mean on the limitless aspects of solidarity and the limits of solidarity. And we only have, unfortunately, 15 minutes to take 2 or 3 questions or 4. However, after this short Q&A, and really I would like to open it immediately to you all because you probably have some, observations and probably you have many questions. To open it to you all, since the spirit of these forums has always been, since their inception, dialogical. We always have mostly off-the-cuff conversations among ourselves, but always with you. And we are kind of in a semicircle because that's how the forums used to be. When we were in a single room, they started very small, but we were always in a circle. So I know you all pretty much. And so after this short, more formal Q&A, we will go outside of the Bartos Theater, and we'll have a glass of wine together as we like to have it, and continue the conversations there. And I should mention that also the book, LaToya's book, is out there in case you would like to acquire it. It's a phenomenal book, and it just came out. So I hope you'll enjoy it. So I'm ready to take questions. Just raise your hand, and the mic will come to you.
Should we bring the lights up in the house as well so we can all see?
All right, great, wonderful. Now, who is a courageous person who will, yes, there is a courageous person in the back.
Hello, my name is Stavia. I want to thank you all for presenting tonight. My question is, I'm a student at NYU, and we recently covered Flint is Family in our class, and we were doing a reading of your writing in the beginning of the book. You spoke about a bit of your distrust by being approached by, I believe it was Elle magazine, in regards to doing the Flint is Family story. So I was curious if you ever, how you dissolve yourself of those feelings, or what was your decision in agreeing to doing that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So, I detailed it quite frankly in the book. That I was able to make that decision because of Gordon Parks' wife, Jean Young. It was Jean Young who pulled me aside to basically, talk to me about how to pick and choose my battles, and kind of took me behind the curtain as to how Gordon had to deal with editors in the way that he was picking and choosing some of those battles. A lot of his images lost a lot of their context and meaning due to some of the text that they were putting over, right? The headline text, as well as a lot of the ads that they were inserting in the work that had nothing to do with the humanity of the subjects and the stories he was telling. So immediately, Jean made sure to tell me, negotiate your own contract and set your own terms. And so the way for me to get around it, the only way for them to even get me to do the story, was that I rewrote the entire contract. And that I made sure that Shay Cobb actually got the last word, not me, not the journalist, not the magazine, but Shay Cobb. And I think it's about understanding that, I'm a bridge and a pathway for my people in the industrial heartland of America. And so when we have to engage with institutions in these larger cities where we know we're not welcomed and not taken seriously and mocked, it requires me to be in that very transparent and vulnerable position where I'm holding myself accountable. I can't win it all, but I definitely fought tooth and nail with those editors, and especially inside of Hearst offices, because I was the only Black woman in there when I went in to take that assignment. The only one. And the only reason you got to hear Shay Cobb's video and her voice was because I locked myself into the office the last week with a video editor and stayed in there until the time was up. And they couldn't do any final edits. They had to take the 11 minutes and play it as it was. And so, you have to be willing to have courage and hold yourself accountable and put yourself out there. I'm sure, with this exhibition and the longer my career and work becomes scrutinized in the public, that people will have critical responses to some of the decisions I made. But I think all we can do as individuals when we're brought opportunities like this is really try to be as true, honest, frank, and vulnerable as possible. But you have to live your own journey and live your own lived experience and know that you made your decisions in the context of what was presented at that moment of the version of who you are and the truth that you were standing on. And that was what was able to be my guiding principle to doing what was right for Shay Cobb.
Sure. Well, I have a question kind of related in a way, just hearing you talk about renegotiating the contract and thinking about some of the other, things that speakers have said, whether it's Don Christian talking about becoming our own archive, or the idea of a university administration at odds with protesting students, and, thinking about, the role of bureaucracy in solidarity, and how that's navigated. I was, thinking, even, Candace, we were talking earlier about the transition to a nonprofit, which is actually quite a bureaucratic act, but it is one of solidarity. And so I don't know, it's a kind of broad question that could be answered a number of ways, but.
I'll jump in. I think I'm thinking all the time now about administration, what it means to be an organization, what it means to take on a 501(c)(3) status in the age of nonprofits as industry, and a complex in itself. And I'm thinking a lot in the ways of it as performance, and how it can be performed with utmost care and love, if at all. But I believe there are pathways too. And again, like LaToya just said, it's like there will be missteps, and I'm an immense critique, I'm sure. But trusting in intention and checks and balances from friends and family.
I can respond because we were talking earlier about starting organizations, and mine began in 2021. It's called Forge Project, and it's 2 hours north of here. It's a Native women-led, now not-for-profit, newly not-for-profit as of the end of January. And I think for us, we realize that when you're making policy, often you need to think about the worst actors instead of the best ones. Because the strength of your legacy is sometimes also in your policy. And we were lucky to work with amazing folks, including my collaborator, Sarah Biscara-Dilly, who's been involved in a lot of negotiations on behalf of her tribe in California. But one of the things that I think will be part of our legacy is that we engaged in formal diplomatic relations with Stockbridge-Munsee community on whose homelands we reside, so that we have shared values, that we have paper that it's written on, but that we can go beyond kind of performative acts of decolonization, which includes, often land acknowledgements and things like that. But I think for us, what was important in that too is Sarah and Monique Tyndall. Monique is the Director of Cultural Affairs at Stockbridge-Munsee, and Mohican folks in the Hudson Valley were removed beginning in the 1700s, a total of 7 times. And all in that time, they were trying to perform acts of solidarity by being allies, often with priests, with settlers. And they became very good home builders, and then when people would see how good their homes were, they wanted them for themselves and move them again and again and again. But part of that work was also to make some working appendices. One is for the protection of Indigenous intellectual property rights, and the other is for folks from the community who will be contract workers to enable their rights within those contract negotiations. And those are appendices that can be used for any contracts that they work on. So I think in organizations, sometimes you need to think creatively also in those ways and actually make bureaucracy work for you.
So I have something to add from a historical perspective, because obviously with the Communist Party, bureaucracy is a big deal. But I also think I felt like I grew up in a moment when a certain kind of political organization didn't feel possible. And as a photo historian, I also feel like we have inherited a lot of theory of photography that was written at a moment of intense despair about the possibility of organization, certainly the party form. I'm not really in a position to say whether or not that's changing, but I mean, I think other panelists suggest that it is. And I think the thing is to think photography's relationship to organizational structure and the kind of work that it does in that context, because once the photographs are part of that infrastructure, they're doing a different kind of work. The work is socially oriented. So things like affect and emotion, they don't stagnate. They have somewhere to go. So in that sense, I think about bureaucracy in relationship to organization as being pretty important, and with your work as well. Yeah.
Sure, I can add one thing, which is that we're seeing various models, the historical models, and then currently people self-organizing. And then I suppose the thing I've been thinking about a lot is those of us who've chosen to work within institutions, and a story we've told ourselves that if you stay inside the institution, you can change the institution from within. And many of us are now, I will just say many of us are questioning that story, and I don't know what the next steps are. Certainly hearing about self-organized formations makes us think of other ways to go.
Hi, thank you very much, everybody, for this amazing presentation. I was listening to you all, and actually Naeem and the presentation that you just made, because I remember also at Documenta in Athens, some discussions that happened in 2017 about photography. And in Athens, the students rose up in the 70s against the dictatorship. And you have the very strong visual from the tanks breaking the university gates and killing the students. And so my question is, because we have all these strong photographic archives that have been mentioned again and again, and that have been embedded in our minds, also from the 30s, as it was mentioned, and then the communist parties and all these things. And somehow there has been this performative aspect of every rise up since that we remember these photographs, and when something happens, like in the universities 10 years ago, now again, we try to imitate that moment, or people expect to see the same things repeat themselves visually. And my question, since we are in a forum about photography, is perhaps photography the wrong medium right now to represent what is happening? Because is it not current? Because somehow it has this memory and archival weight that cannot express the actual moment right now. I don't know if my question makes any sense.
I mean, I think it's an impossible question to answer. In a way, we're all living through this moment. The photograph freezes the moment, and then there's all that we know happened afterwards that it never captures. I mentioned the orange vest moment, which I had posted on social media, and it got an immediate reaction. And then what you don't see in that image is that right afterwards, the invocation of security was extended to say that faculty can't enter the campus, right? So that, we can stay forever with that image and say it's a repeat of 68 when there's one photograph from 68, which I didn't include, where the faculty, and you notice they're majority men and they're all in suits and ties, but they're all surrounding that building so that nobody can get in. And so I thought of this orange vest moment, it's invocation, but in the next moment, you don't have that. So, but I don't know what is the other medium also. With which we can tell a different kind of story. I've more been thinking about the fact also that the photographic image is always of the heroic moment, and it doesn't include the aftermath. And I've increasingly been thinking of the aftermath of the people who also become the collateral damage. So we celebrate their lives, but they also go into these other kinds of lives. I'm very unclear what to think about it right now, because this literally is the history we're living through. I don't know another medium to work with besides photography to capture the moment, but it does have this thing of always maybe the stone being thrown, but not the aftermath.
I wanted to say thank you to everyone for coming to bear witness to this experience. I don't take it lightly that I would be speaking to or listening to myself, which I do mostly, if it weren't for you. And I think we often forget the power of being present and holding space and the connection between listening and solidarity. We often don't allow others to speak and to sincerely listen. So thank you all for that. Thank you also to each person for their pre-prepared presentations. I only prepare with my breath. I wanted to speak to this question about bureaucracy because Eric and I and others from For Freedoms performed respectability so that we could get opportunities in institutions like this. But as Eric knows, I've been trying to dismantle that for like 4 years and failing, because we can also get trapped in our own performance. And when I think about Audre Lorde's statement that the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house, it's a longer quote, so you should read it all. But I do think about the desire to kind of become a part of this system that I have such a complicated relationship with. And where do I actually find liberation? I don't believe it's in paperwork. I don't believe it's in algorithm. I think it is in being conscious, in my ability to share a moment with another person. And so my challenge with my life, which I love social media, but my life that became mediated through images and knowing how limiting images are in true reality, where I see something and someone's happy or someone's good looking or someone's somewhere I want to be or someone's doing something I think I should do, I stop being with myself. And so I think part of what your statement is about, like this trying to capture this moment that happened, or trying to connect moments that didn't happen or happened that didn't happen or whatever. We're at a time when probably 10 years from now, or maybe sooner, none of that will matter because we won't be able to tell the difference between a historical image from Spain or Greece in 1932 or an authentic image from yesterday, because of the way in which technology has kind of captured our imagination. And so I just wanted to like highlight the optimistic skepticism that I call consciousness in this work.
I just want to add to that. Photography absolutely is the right medium. It absolutely is. And I'm going to proclaim it in this show over and over and over. The issue is the way we contextualize the images, right? We're not contextualizing our images in a generous, honest, truthful way. That is the problem with social media, celebrity culture, the fact that we prioritize CEOs and politicians and corporations over everyday people, right? We have to become more open and realize that taking our images and talking in a vulnerable way about our daily lived experiences within our families and our communities is the most powerful act at this time. You have a cell phone, you have social media, and yet you're not posting things that are vulnerable, that tell the truth about what your run-ins are like in your doctor's appointments, or when you're trying to take your kids to school, or when you're trying to get through the infrastructure of your city and it's crumbling and falling apart, or something that you saw happen to another person. We're not really talking about things that are right in front of our face. And I know why that is. It's because this nation is so damn fearful. And it's so fearful of having conversations because we're afraid of making a mistake with the language that we use, right? The bottom line is it is intergenerational, right? We are all shaped, first and foremost, by the brutality of capitalism and how violent it is. So you got to get honest about that. And then, of course, by the fear of being able to speak up in these very chaotic, tumultuous moments. I think one of the best things that we could do to challenge ourselves as a society and a humanity is to really make the mistake in trying to articulate something with somebody else that you're like, oh, I can't talk about that issue because I'm not them, right? That's the biggest mistake we keep making. And it's frankly, it just keeps us stuck. And then we become part of these silos. And then we continue to self-segregate. And what I'm trying to get across to you in this exhibition, again, Monuments of Solidarity is about the act of organizing with other people in a multiracial, intergenerational way through the process of making photographs and storytelling. And it is a very simple thing to do, but I think we overthink it because, again, we're self-editing our words, our thoughts. We're letting other people edit the prophecies of why we're called to be here and the things we're supposed to do in this realm that is making us fall short spiritually. And so this exhibition really does uplift you, right? Through faith, hope, love, camaraderie. It really is teaching you how to shoulder these things. And one of the things that I'm doing through the photographs and the storytelling with each and every last one of them through their testimonies is showing you how to get there, right? But that really starts with how you've internalized these ideas that have really led to these terrible relationships with your images, whether it's your family album or the images that you have in your phone right now. Like, your homework assignment tonight is to take one of the photographs in your phone, right? Or even a memory that an image that you have might trigger, and really talk about it, right? What is the real deep-seated feeling and meaning behind that image? Like, we're forgetting that our family albums are a very powerful weapon, and you'll see it in Act 2 in the exhibition, where Shay's father, Mr. Smiley, only knew to do one thing when he saw what his daughter was going through in Flint. And that was to send her a picture of her when she was 12 years old. A picture he took of her, unknowing that a water crisis would happen and this image would become the most useful tool to summon his daughter to safety. He takes this picture of her sipping from the fresh spring head on her land in Newton, Mississippi that she's going to inherit. 90 acres of land with their own water, their own fresh water spring, their own fruit trees, and their own Tennessee walking horses. No media outlet in New York would publish this. I had to produce it myself. And if it wasn't for SF MoMA and Unjiju creating Soft Power Exhibition, inviting me to unveil that work for the first time in 2019, the works would have never seen the light of day. So he takes this picture, he texts it to her when we're in the midst of starting our photo shoot for Act 1, and he simply wrote, "This water won't kill you, come home." And it's a picture he took of his daughter as a little girl, right? Like, there is power in the family photo albums that you have and in the pictures that you're taking every day where you're desensitized and not thinking about it because you're taking so many of them. Like, pause. Look at them. Write about how you feel. Take an hour out of your busy schedules to really contextualize and write about what the photographs mean to you, right? These aren't things that arbitrarily get thrown away or become digitized somewhere in a cloud. Like, don't let that happen. In fact, I would encourage you to push back against the advancement of technology and AI. I always regress and stay in the dark room. All my work is made sitting in people's living rooms, kitchens, dining rooms, making photographs and interviewing them. I'm doing the complete opposite, right? Risking my life, going into communities as a stranger, going into people's homes, going into people's jobs, and literally talking to them and taking photographs back to them and saying, well, forget about my educated point of view. How do you see this image? What did you feel when you made it? What does it mean to you now? What do you want people to know about what's really going on, or what you want to see happen as a result of that? And then on top of it, I would hope that this exhibition would get across to you in Flint Act 3, which is very confrontational. It is an army of angels that will greet you in the third or fourth room, where they are standing in one accord, showing themselves to you, wrapping their arms around you. And I want you to understand, I am not talking about making documentary photographs to raise awareness, to tell stories. I've been beyond that over a decade ago, but people have not caught up. And I want you to catch up in this show to realize what I'm saying. We are literally standing on photographs as the platform to raise the currency, the resources, making something out of nothing to provide the justice for the people that are in the images, that are telling the story, that want to affect the change. The photograph, they're wielding the power of the photograph to do it, right? We literally stood on the photographs to bring a 26,000 pound atmospheric water generator from Fort Sam, Houston, all the way to Flint, Michigan, and then funded a water mission with it. So don't let your memory or collective consciousness fall short of that. Challenge yourself to understand. We moved far beyond telling the story of the water crisis through the people. We literally took civic engagement and action on our own, and we had to circumvent all of the local elected officials, black, white, all of them, because they wouldn't let us put the generator on the ground there without us being able to outsmart them and put it where the sister tours families own land. That's how we got the machine on the ground. But literally, we were doing this through the process of making photographs. That is what this is about. That's what I want you to realize. So don't be discouraged by what you see happening in the media. I think look in your own cell phone, your own family album, create these other type of images that allow us to put out these types of inspirational stories. Because I do think it's important, and I think why people don't touch Flynn is Family Act 3 enough is because of the ideology it sets forth. And that is, in this country, where not only is the water polluted through man-made ecological corporate disasters, it is also plastic that has taken over our water. So every single last one of us, our bodies are being harmed right now. All of our water is contaminated. And the reason people don't touch Act 3 is because the idea it puts forth. Circumvent your local government when they deny your democracy. Do not pay those high water bills. And if you have to, then gain your access to free, clean water through that technology that Moses West provided. And I believe that what it preaches and teaches is that we shouldn't have to pay our municipalities for that water. And that's why people are afraid and why you should look at what Act 3 is actually showing you and look up Moses West and the atmospheric water generator and buy one because it's portable. They're making portable ones now where you can afford and put them on cars, trucks, drive them around local communities, and everyone collect water so you can give your body a break from this contaminated water that we are all ingesting. So don't allow yourself to just see an image and say, oh, well, there wasn't anything after, I didn't see a result. The thing is, it is there. You're just not looking, and you're not holding yourself accountable to the image. The image is requiring you to collaborate with it by the way you're looking at it. So hold yourself accountable to the way that you're behaving with your images, whether it's the album, cell phone images, or images you recontextualize from the mass media. That is on us to reframe these stories. And so I would say the images, the photographs aren't falling short. It's the way we fail to contextualize them in the first place.
Please join us for a glass of wine. Thank you all so very much.